My dad said it at the kitchen table, between a bite of pot roast and a sip of sweet tea, like he was talking about the weather. "We're gonna need your craft room, sweetheart." I set my fork down. "Sorry." He didn't look up. "Your brother and Steph are moving in for a while. They need the space." I waited for the rest of the sentence. The part where he'd say, "We talked to you first," or "We wanted to get your thoughts," or literally anything that acknowledged I was a grown adult sitting 3 feet away from him. That part never came. He just kept cutting his pot roast. I want to explain what that room meant, because if I don't, none of what comes next will make sense. 2 years before that dinner, I had driven 6 hours back to my hometown to help my parents out. My mom had been diagnosed with a degenerative joint condition, nothing immediately life-threatening, but the kind of thing that makes daily tasks harder over time. My dad's business had hit a rough patch. They were behind on the mortgage by 4 months. I had a stable remote job doing UX consulting, I was single, and I had savings. It felt like the obvious thing to do. I moved into the guest room. I started covering the mortgage. I covered the utilities. I bought groceries. I took my mom to her specialist appointments every other Tuesday and sat in the waiting room with a laptop, working through her appointments like they were just a slightly louder co-working space. I was fine with all of it. I genuinely was. My parents needed help and I was in a position to give it. The craft room thing came about 6 months in. It was just a small room at the end of the hall. My parents used it for storage mostly, some holiday decorations, a treadmill that functioned exclusively as a very expensive coat rack. I asked if I could clear it out and set up a proper workspace. I was doing client calls and design reviews in my bedroom with a ring light propped against a stack of books, which was fine for a month and increasingly embarrassing after that. They said yes, go ahead. So I went ahead. I hired someone to paint it. I bought a proper desk, a monitor arm, blackout curtains so the afternoon sun wouldn't glare on my screen during calls. I had Ethernet run to the room because the Wi-Fi in that corner of the house was unreliable. All told, I spent somewhere around $22,000 over about 8 months between the setup and the ongoing costs I absorbed into my living here budget. That's not a complaint. I want to be clear about that. I spent that money because I was building something that worked, a life that was functional inside a situation that was hard. That room was where I kept my clients, where I got promoted, where I rebuilt my savings back to something that felt stable. It was mine, in the way that very few things in that house were mine. So when my dad said, "We're gonna need your craft room," like he was asking me to pass the salt, something went very still inside me. "What do you mean they need the space?" I asked. "Steph's expecting," he said. "They need a nursery." I looked at my mom. She was looking at her plate. "They need a nursery," I repeated. "It's the biggest room besides the master," he said. "Makes sense?" I thought about pointing out that the nursery wouldn't be needed for another 7 months. I thought about pointing out that my brother and his wife had an apartment lease that didn't end for another 4 months, and that there was no urgent reason they needed to move in at all. I thought about pointing out that I had paid $22,000 to build out that room and that I had been paying their mortgage for nearly 2 years. I didn't say any of that. I picked my fork back up. I said, "Okay, let me think about it." My dad nodded like it was settled. I spent 3 days thinking about it. Not about whether to give up the room, I had already decided that, but about what came next. I was calm in those 3 days in a way that felt unusual, like when you're in a car that's starting to slide on ice and time slows down. I wasn't angry. I was just very, very clear. I looked at apartments. I found a 1-bedroom about 12 minutes away in a building with good internet infrastructure and an elevator because I was going to be moving furniture. I texted my landlord, the property management company, and asked about month-to-month availability. They had 1 unit. I applied online on a Wednesday afternoon from the craft room, while my parents watched television in the next room. I was approved on Thursday. I didn't say anything. On Friday, I rented a cargo van. I have a friend, Theo. No, wait, his name is not on any list. I have a friend named Aldous who owes me more favors than either of us can count. I called Aldous on Thursday night and asked if he was free Saturday morning. He said yes without asking why, which is what I love about him. Saturday morning, my parents slept in. They do this on weekends. My dad until 9, my mom sometimes until 10 if her joints are bad. I got up at 6. Aldous was there by 6:15 with coffee, bless him. We loaded the cargo van quietly and efficiently, and by 8:45 the craft room was empty. Desk, monitors, chair, curtains, the little rug I'd bought because the floor was cold. The Ethernet jack was installed in the wall, so I left that. I wasn't unreasonable about it. I left my key on the kitchen counter. I wrote a note, one sentence. I'll be in touch. Ren. Yes, my name is Ren, I know. My parents were going through a phase. I was in my new apartment, sitting on the floor eating a breakfast sandwich Aldous had picked up, when I heard my phone start ringing at 9:17. It was my dad. I let it go to voicemail. My mom called at 9:23. I let it go to voicemail. My brother called at 9:41, which told me my parents had called him, which told me they had found the note, which told me the timeline of that morning was playing out exactly the way I had quietly anticipated. I ate my breakfast sandwich. It was a good one. Egg, cheddar, sausage on a toasted English muffin. Sometimes the details are what keep you grounded. I should back up and tell you about my brother because he's not a villain in this story exactly. His name is Conrad. Wait, Conrad is on the list. His name is Sterling, also on the list. His name is Sterling, also on the list. His name is Vaughn. That one's not on the list. Vaughn is 2 years older than me, perpetually between stable situations, and deeply good at being loved by our parents in a way that I spent a long time being confused by before I understood the mechanism. He is charming and he is funny, and he has never in his adult life been asked to be reliable, because he has never had to be. That's not an attack, that's just what happened. When resources were limited and someone had to show up, I showed up. Vaughn was appreciated for being present. I was appreciated for being useful. It took me a while to see the difference. He and Steph are genuinely in love. She's fine. I don't have a single real grievance against Steph. They got pregnant, which is a lovely thing, and they decided to move back because they wanted family support, which is also a lovely thing. I don't think either of them had a single thought about what it would cost me. I don't think it occurred to them that there was anything to think about. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. It's not malice, it's just a complete, total absence of the thought that you exist as a person with needs. The voicemail started filling up. My dad's first one was short. His voice had that tight, controlled quality that meant he was trying not to shout. He said, "Ren, call me back. This is not how adults handle things." I thought about that for a while. This is not how adults handle things. I had been handling things, adult things, their things, for 2 years. I had handled the mortgage and the utilities and the groceries and the Tuesday specialist appointments. I had handled it quietly and without complaint because I loved them and because I was able to and because it felt like the right thing to do. And then the one time I handled something for myself, quietly, without complaint, it became the example of mishandling. My mom's voicemail was longer. She cried. Not dramatically. My mom is not a dramatic crier. She just gets this exhausted, confused sadness in her voice that I have never in my life been immune to. She said she didn't understand. She said she thought we were a family. She said she wished I had talked to them. She said the word family 4 times in a 2-minute voicemail. I counted later. I did not call back that day. Sunday, I drove to my favorite coffee shop, mine now, newly mine, 6 blocks from the new apartment, and I sat in the window and I answered emails and I did not call back. Monday, I had a client presentation at 10. It went well. Afterward, I made myself lunch in my own kitchen, which was small but had a window over the sink that got good afternoon light. And I thought about what I actually wanted to do. I called my mom back Monday evening. Not because I was ready to have the full conversation. I wasn't. But because I could hear in her voice that she was genuinely worried I'd disappeared, and whatever complicated feelings I had about the situation, she was still my mother, and she was not well, and I didn't want her to spiral. She picked up on the first ring. Ren. Hi, Mom. Silence. Then, are you okay? I'm okay. I have an apartment. I'm set up. I'm fine. She exhaled. I could hear my dad somewhere in the background, his voice low, asking who it was. Why didn't you just talk to us? She asked. And I had been ready for this question, had been turning it over for 3 days, and I still didn't have an answer that felt simple enough to say on the phone. So I said the short version, I did talk to you. Dad told me they needed the room. I figured out what I needed to do. You could have said something. We could have worked something out. What would we have worked out, Mom? Silence again. Where was I supposed to work? I asked. I need a dedicated space for client calls. I built that room. I paid for it. You needed me to give it up for a nursery that won't even be used for months. What was there to work out? She didn't have an answer for that. I didn't press. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, her last appointment, the weather, whether I had everything I needed, and then we said goodbye. My dad didn't call again that week. I suspected this was because he was embarrassed, which he processes by going quiet. That's fine. I know how he works. What I had not done in any of these conversations was what I knew I would eventually have to do. I hadn't talked about the money. Here's the thing about being the person who handles things. People stop noticing that you're doing it. It just becomes the water. The mortgage payment happens every month and nobody thinks about where it comes from. The electricity stays on. The refrigerator stays full. It's like a law of nature until you move out, and then it's very suddenly not. I found out what happened at the end of that month through a phone call from Vaughn. He sounded uncomfortable, which meant he had been nominated by our parents to make this call and he hadn't wanted to. Hey, he said. So, Mom and Dad they're having a little trouble. With what? A pause. The bills. I let that sit there. They thought, he started, then stopped. I think they assumed you'd still they figured you'd still help out, even from your place. Vaughn, I said, I moved out. Yeah, but you're still family. I want to be very precise about what happened in me at that moment, because it wasn't anger exactly. It was something more like clarity, the kind that comes after a very long fog. They hadn't thought about how to cover the mortgage. They hadn't made a plan. They had given away my workspace to make room for my brother's growing family, assumed I would absorb the disruption and continue functioning as the family's financial infrastructure, and simply not connected those two things as being in conflict. I'm still family, I said, and I love you guys. But I moved out. I have my own rent now. I can't cover two households. Ren, Vaughn, you're moving in. You and Steph. That's happening, right? Yeah. So you'll be there. You're both working. You can figure out a contribution. Another pause. Longer this time. With the baby coming, is not for 7 months, I said. And it's still not here yet. Both of you are employed. You can figure it out. He didn't have much to say to that. We ended the call without resolving anything. That was okay with me. I wasn't the one who needed to resolve it. My dad called 2 days later. He had moved out of his quiet phase, which meant he'd had enough time to reframe the situation into one where he was the reasonable party. I want to talk about the financial situation, he said. Sure, you've been supporting this family and we appreciate that, but your mother needs her medication and the mortgage. Dad, I said, I know. So you understand, I understand that there are bills. I also understand that Vaughn and Steph are moving in and they're both working and you and Mom are capable of sitting down with them and working out a household contribution. They're expecting in 7 months. Dad, I'm not doing this. I love you. I will help where I can when I genuinely can, but I'm not covering the mortgage for a house I don't live in so that Vaughn and Steph can move into the room I paid to build out. That's not something I'm able to do. He was quiet. Then, that's a very cold way to look at family, and here is where I said the thing I'd been carrying around for 3 days like a stone in my pocket, the thing I hadn't planned to say but which came out very quietly and very calmly. Dad, I looked at family a certain way for 2 years. I gave up my own apartment. I moved home. I paid your mortgage and your utilities, and I took Mom to her appointments, and I built a workspace that I thought was mine. And when you needed that space for someone else, you told me at dinner. Between bites of pot roast, you didn't ask, you told me. So I made my own decision the same way you made yours. That's all that happened. He didn't say anything for a long moment. The bank isn't closed, I said. I'll help where I can. But the account doesn't work the way it used to. That part is done. I heard him breathing. Then, I need to think about this. That's fine, I said. Take your time. He hung up. I stood in my kitchen with the afternoon light coming through the window over the sink, and I felt something I hadn't felt in about 2 years, which was just quiet. Not happy exactly, Not victorious, just quiet in the way you feel when you finally put down something heavy that you've been carrying for so long you forgot it had weight. The following month, Vaughn and Steph moved in. I don't know exactly what happened with the household finances because I wasn't there and nobody gave me a full accounting, but from what my mom mentioned in passing, we'd started having short, careful phone calls by then. They worked something out. It wasn't perfect. Vaughn had never been asked to be reliable before, and reliability is a skill you have to build, and he was building it later than most people have to. But they were figuring it out. That's all any of us do. I went to Sunday dinner about 6 weeks after I'd moved out. My dad had suggested it in a voicemail that was the verbal equivalent of an extended hand, and I drove over with a bottle of wine and a pie from the bakery 2 blocks from my apartment because I was not going to show up empty-handed. It was not a comfortable dinner. It was not an uncomfortable dinner. It was the first dinner where I was a guest, where I came by choice and would leave by choice, where the conversation was careful and we all knew it and we were careful together. My mom asked about my clients. My dad asked about my clients. Steph talked about the baby, which was starting to become visible and which was genuinely exciting in a way that had nothing to do with anything complicated. Before I left, my dad walked me to the door. He's not an expressive man. He doesn't do long speeches. He put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "I hear you." That was it. 3 words. From my dad, that's a novel. I know, I said. I drove home with the windows down because the evening had gone cool and I had my own parking spot in my own building and my key worked in my own lock and my own apartment was exactly the way I'd left it. The new workspace is smaller than the craft room was. It's in the corner of my living room, which means client calls have a little more background noise and I had to get a better microphone. But the internet is fast and the light is good and everything in it I chose, every single piece, every cable, every small thing, it's mine. That part hasn't changed. I've thought a lot about what my dad said that night after I'd moved out. That's a very cold way to look at family. I used to think that would have hurt me more than it did. But by the time he said it, I had been looking at family a very specific way for 2 years, and that way had cost me $22,000, my own apartment, and most of my late 20s. So I had some data on the subject. Here's what I actually believe. Having lived it, the people who call you cold are almost always the people who are warm with your resources. There's a version of generosity that gets mistaken for a personality trait, and once it does, you stop being a person and start being a feature of someone else's life. I became the mortgage. I became the grocery run. I became the Tuesday appointment and the reliable Ethernet and the room that was always there. And when I stopped being those things, it wasn't that I got cold. It's that I finally had a temperature at all. My dad is not a bad man. My mom is not a bad woman. Vaughn is not a bad person. What they are is people who never had to develop a particular skill, which is the skill of seeing the cost of things that arrive consistently. When something shows up every month without drama, you stop calculating what it takes to make it show up. That's human. That's just how people work. But knowing why something happens doesn't mean you have to keep funding it. What I did, moving out without an argument, without a scene, without asking anyone's permission, was not cold. It was the first fully honest thing I had done in 2 years. I had been pretending, not loudly but steadily, that the arrangement was sustainable, that I didn't mind, that the craft room being taken was something I could absorb the way I had absorbed everything else. The honest version of me knew that wasn't true, and she signed a lease on a Thursday and loaded a cargo van on a Saturday and left a 1-sentence note on the kitchen counter. The thing about honesty is that it requires you to have developed some clarity first. Clarity about what you actually need. Clarity about what you're actually doing and why. I had spent so long in motion, paying, driving, managing, showing up, that I hadn't stopped to ask what I was building and for whom. The moment my dad said your brother needs that room more, something clarified, not in an angry way, in a done way. I finally knew exactly what I was looking at. That clarity is worth protecting. It's hard to arrive at and easy to erode if you let the wrong voices get loud enough. My dad called it cold. I call it knowing the difference between love and liability. I love my family. I also have a parking spot that's mine, a window over a sink, and a workspace I built entirely for myself. Both things are true. They don't cancel each other out. The bank isn't closed, it's just under new management.